Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is a clinical psychologist, no other than Dr. David Marcus.
Hi.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. David. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. I've been in practice for about 40 years, specializing in families under stress. So I see entire families. Oh, there you are. You look, I can see you better now.
Yes,
and
indeed.
and so over the course of that time, I've talked to many children and their parents about how to communicate with one another and how to help a child to develop an emotional language and how to make it safe for them to speak with you and starting from birth actually, how does that work and how can you facilitate that with the environment. So a lot of what I talk about is lifestyle sometimes and the impact of having multiple children or high stress situations on families. I've done a lot of custody work, when embattled families, I guess you'd say. So families under stress is what I've been doing, and at the request actually of many of my patients over the 40 years, they've asked me to write it down, and I've written a book that's forthcoming. I'm trying to get it published as we speak, called Parent RX, and part of why I'm talking with you, Daniel, is to create a platform for the book. You know, so people can go to my website, which is parentrx.org, and see podcasts that I've done and see what's going to be included in the book. So,
Mr. or Dr. David Marcus, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world or your knowledge to the world. So let's talk about the maturational process and facilitating environment. A facilitating environment studies and the theory of emotional development. What was your primary motivation for reading this particular work on emotional development and maturation?
what is my primary motivation?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you asked me? I'm sorry. Well, my primary motivation is because when I see families, you know, I'm in private practice and parents bring their children to see me, and I realize over the years that they really can't communicate with one another. And there's many reasons why that occurs. Developmental reasons, familial reasons, cultural reasons, uh, work reasons. There's so many different factors that can affect successful emotional maturation in children and emotional communication between parents and children. So, studying mostly from the children what they needed from their parents, I came up with, what has to happen between a parent and a child, basically from birth, to facilitate a child's emotional maturation and their capacity to communicate verbally their emotions as opposed to behaviorally. Young children, of course, uh, they express their emotions behaviorally. They can throw tantrums, they can be gleeful. Somehow they have to learn that you can't throw tantrums. You got to quote unquote use your words. That's a phrase that so many parents turn to their children and say, "Hey, I don't hit your brother. Use your words." I had one situation I'll share with you as an anecdote that's taught me a lot. I was seeing a mom after I seen her two sons. They were 8 and 7, I believe, and they were out in the waiting room, and we could hear a tussle, and then we heard a yell. So we both get up and we look, and there's the 8-year-old holding his arm like this, and in tears, and the younger one's looking like really guilty. And you know, mom says, "What's going on?" And the 8-year-old said, he bit me. And he takes away his hand, and there are bite marks on his arm. I mean, the boy really bit him, you know. Now, here's the poor woman. You know, she's in the child psychologist's office, and her children are biting one another. She was quite embarrassed. And she turned to the younger one and said, I had told you to use your words. And the 6-year-old turned to her and looked at her in all innocence and said, I don't know how. And I said, that's where we have to go. He doesn't know how. Now, in order to understand the child development part of this, if I can continue, Daniel.
Go ahead, mister.
Okay. There are 4 assumptions that parents make about their children about communication and development, that if any of these 4 assumptions, I call them the assumptions of emotionality, if any of them are false, then the child will not or cannot communicate with you. Okay? You'll get an I don't know, or I don't want to talk about it, or, you know, whatever it is, they're not going to talk to you. And that leaves parents, of course, at a loss as far as what to do. So often they just give consequences saying, don't do that again. That's not promoting communication. That's basically telling the child, you've been bad. And the child, you know, doesn't really say anything. So here are the 4 assumptions that parents make, and they go developmentally from younger to older. And the first one is that the child experiences their emotions. Now, most children, almost all children, know when they're mad, when they're sad, when they're anxious. So this is an assumption we can say is true. All right. But based on that one, okay, the child has their emotions, experiences them. Can they tolerate the intensity of those emotions? Now, that you cannot assume is true. Young children experience their emotions very intensely. We see this all the time. The tantrum, for instance, is, you know, and I see children under the age of 3. I've had a little girl come in and I asked her a question. She went like this because she couldn't tolerate the question. So one of the skills that parents have to have is, how do I help my child to tolerate their intense emotions? The third assumption, based on the first 2, the child has their emotions and they can tolerate them. Does the child have the language to express it verbally? Now, many parents make the, you know, mistake of thinking, well, my child's really bright, so therefore they can express themselves verbally, their emotions verbally. That's a bad assumption to make. It's a totally other skill. You can be the brightest child in the world, but you may not have an emotional language. And the last one, which is real big in teenagers, by the way. The child has their emotions, they can tolerate the intensity, they have the language. The 4th assumption, is it safe for me to tell this person how I feel? Often teenagers don't feel safe to tell their parents how they feel or what they're doing, etc., etc. If any of those assumptions are incorrect, then you're not going to get an answer. You're not going to communicate. So how do you make it safe for a child to talk to you? Here's where we get into the nurturing environment. Here we get into the maturation process. Okay, we're talking about emotional maturity now. Okay. Do you have any questions or?
Yes. So, Dr. David, can you identify a particular case study or example from the book that significantly impacted your thinking?
Oh, sure. You know, one of the things that I am stressing in the book is not only the development of an emotional language, but the development of a common emotional language between parents and children. See, what parents often do is they make an assumption. They say, oh, my child is angry. Well, I know what it's like to be angry. I went through times when I was angry. And they'll go into an explanation of, hey, you know, I know what it's like to be angry. This is what I did when I was angry. No, that doesn't really help the child, okay? Because the parent is talking rather than the child is talking. And anger to what the parents' experiences are with, say, anger or anxiety is vastly different than what their children are experiencing. All right. We assume it's the same. Anger is anger. No, it's not. Okay. So, what I mean by a common emotional language, and I'll give you this sample. I was seeing, I believe he was an 8-year-old boy. I'm going to call him Tony. That wasn't his name. And he was telling me about anger. And I was asking, well, he was talking about his parents. Oh, my mom really makes me mad. You know, tell me about what does she do that makes you angry? Common question. Well, she favors my brother and she doesn't listen to me when I try to explain that it was his fault, you know? Well, give me a word that describes your anger. Well, it makes me volcano mad, which I thought was a pretty cool one, volcano mad. Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, and your anger, a 10 would be volcano mad. Yes, Dr. Marcus. What would be like a 1? Oh, I don't know. Having to, brush my teeth before I go to bed. That's not a big deal, but I don't like it. How about a middle one, 5? That's a tough one. How do you judge 5? Well, he said, my mom makes me eat my peas. I don't like peas, so it makes me angry to about a 5. From there on in, when I would talk to him about things that made him angry, was that brushing your teeth mad, eating your peas mad, or volcano mad? And he really appreciated that, and it taught me a lot as a child therapist, because I'm relating his emotions to his experiences, not mine. Therefore, you're coming with a common emotional language where the parent uses the words that the child comes up with, and that becomes the common emotional language between them. And this is very reassuring to a child, all right? Because mom's listening, dad's listening, they understand what I mean.
Very well
So,
said, Dr. David. Very well said. Great analogy. So, did you find any concept presented difficult to grasp or accept?
did I find any concept difficult to grasp? Okay, the difficulty is trying to explain to parents the process of developing an emotional language with their children. Okay. The hardest cases are, of course, when the child doesn't want to be there. I'm a stranger. I mean, kids can see that I like them, but like with a teenager, a 12-year-old, they may sit there like this, and I go, they don't want to be here. In fact, my office looks out on the parking lot. Okay, Daniel. And I can tell how a child opens the car door if they want to be there. Now, some therapists get intimidated by the teenagers sitting there like this because, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. But there is a way around it. And it's very straightforward. Child walks into the office, he sits down like this. And I say to him, my guess is you really don't want to be here. And he goes, like this, yeah, I don't want to be here. Well, okay. Chances are you really don't want to be here. Tell me about not wanting to be here. Well, my mom made me come and my dad said I don't care. And they're talking. Now, here's the key to this. I'm sitting there mirroring back what I hear. So your dad does this and your mom does this and it makes you angry to like, how angry? It makes me angry to an 8, doctor. He's talking now, right?
Yes.
And so the key here is this. When anybody, including children, feel truly heard and understood by my mirroring back what they're saying and understanding it, that gives people the hope that things can be better. Right? That gives
Yes.
them the hope that things can be better. And typically, by the second or third time I see the child, they're asking me, can you please talk to my parents about this or that or the other? Which is prognostically very good because they still have the hope that the parents can make things better. and they got the hope from me. All right. And that's the process. Rather than trying to just, tell me what's wrong, tell me what, trying to give the third degree to a child who's sitting there going, no, they're not going to. You have to know how
For
to
sure.
approach them,
They will
So those
fight
are the
back.
toughest cases. Hmm.
Certainly, Dr. David. How do you think understanding a maturational process can benefit individuals working in education, psychology, or caregiving roles?
Let me make sure I understand your question, Daniel. You're asking me what the maturational process is.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We're going to get into some kind of heavy material here that's partly psychoanalytic, partly dynamic, partly behavioral. All right. So I'll try to make it as clear as I can. All right.
Yes.
A child comes into the world, a baby, and of course they're totally dependent. But a child, before they're ambulatory, before they can walk, pretty much sees their parents as just an extension of them, like an arm or a leg. All right. The natural order of things is a parent is always at the beck and call of an infant. They whimper, you're there. And that's good because a child at that age, it's called object constancy. They cannot keep the parent's image in their mind long enough. All right. Once they're ambulatory, they can. All right. But first year, no, you know. And so if the parent is absent too much or let them cry themselves to sleep or something like that, the child actually experiences like they lost an arm or a leg. And that can lead to something called, this is, again, psychoanalytic material, disintegration anxiety. The child actually feels like they're falling apart. This is very scary for a child. So the parent needs to be there and present. I mean, I remember this one couple I saw, they were friends, and she had a rough birth, and they said, well, we're going to leave the new baby. The baby was, 10 days old, with grandma, and we're going to take a few days and go to Acapulco. We need the break. And I turned to him, I said, no, you're not. No, you are not. Your child needs you there consistently now as more than ever. Okay. They need that. All right. So that's just the beginning. The parent is nurturing. When you think about the term I use, I'll share it with you. It's in the book. It's called a soothing presence. Now, what is a soothing presence? Well, in its simplest form, Daniel, a soothing presence is basically somebody who's okay when you're not okay. When you think about people that you turn to, even as adults, when you're upset about something, we typically choose certain people, friends or family, right, to talk to. And there are only certain people, and invariably these people are okay when we're not okay. You know, and by these people being able to hear it out and mirror back what they hear and stay okay themselves, we can kind of borrow that okayness, begin to take it where it's intense in here to out here where we can now look at it with this soothing presence. And then we can kind of figure out what to do about it. But as long as it stays inside and intense because, it's not safe to say it, or we don't have the words to say it, all the things we just mentioned, it stays intense. And here's what happens, and this is what really gets in the way of communication between parents, couples, and parents and their children. What happens when things stay inside? Well, we it's intense. It feels uncomfortable. In fact, sometimes we feel like we're not in control of our emotions, right? So it can be
Yes.
scary as well, you see. So, what do we do as human beings? What do we do? We focus inwardly on how we're feeling and try to do something about it. We may go for a run, talk to somebody, journal, watch TV and distract ourselves. But the point I'm trying to make is this: when we're filled up with emotion, intense emotion, we focus inwardly to try to deal with it. So by definition, Daniel, we are not focused outwardly on what people are saying to us. This is what happens. Somebody can give you the most logical explanation of why you shouldn't feel the way you feel, and that person doesn't hear it. They may hear that 5% that somehow supports how they feel, but they don't hear it. There's a phrase called a blinding rage. Have you ever heard that phrase, Daniel? A blinding rage.
A blend, no. Can you enlighten us,
Okay,
Dr. David?
I will tell you what it means, okay? A blinding rage. Well, when somebody is so filled up with anger, they are literally blind to everything that's around them, okay? So, one of the one of the things that has to happen is this person needs to be emptied out of all that rage so they can even hear what you have to say. Now, without understanding that, one person's in a blinding rage, they attack the person who's trying to talk to them. That fills up the other person, makes them angry. Now everybody's filled up, everybody's talking, and nobody is listening. And this is what happens between couples sometimes, and they go, I can't talk to you. It's like talking to a brick wall. And we know when we're filled up with intense emotion. We have phrases that tell us this, like, I've had it up to here, or the straw that broke the camel's back. See? Now, the reason I'm going through this is because we have to help our children to develop the capacity to handle intense emotion. How do we do it? Well, we begin with being the soothing presence. Now, how do you soothe a child who's upset? A baby, you hold them, you coo to them, you sing to them, right? That's soothing. The rumble of your chest, oh, As they get a little older, you might talk to them, or they may talk to you. You see? Now, how do you transition from that, from just holding them to being able to talk to them? You begin with what I was saying. Okay, the child is having an intense emotion. You start. Sometimes people start with pictures. Okay, I'm going to explain this to you. You start, as I said, children experience their emotions very intensely. It's much easier for them to describe their emotions in the third person than it is in the first person. All right? How do you do that? Well, play therapists do this, They'll draw a picture of your family. Now tell me about this person, this person, this person, Or they'll use a dollhouse, third person, or they'll tell a story about a family. But they're talking about a they're called projective techniques, if you want the psychological term for it. The child is projecting their own problems, difficulties, viewpoints onto a doll, onto a picture, or into a story. And it's easier for them to do that than to say, this is what I'm going through, because that's too intense. You see. More often than not, once you go through this a while, the child will say, oh, that's me. But they had to approach it that way because of how intense it was in the first person. So that's one thing to get past the intensity, right? The next step, of course, is developing the language. And I began to talk about that, what happens, I started throwing a book at my brother. Tell me about the throwing of the book at your brother. Well, this is what happened. You know what I mean? That type of thing. And he's, well, can you give me a word that describes how angry you were? Oh, I had one. With little children, if they can't find the words, I say, show me with your hands. Were you this mad, this mad, this mad, or that mad? What amazes me is young children can actually touch their hands behind their back. I can't do that. It would hurt. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
you say, I am the whole world mad, Dr. Marcus. And then I'll start using that phrase. Oh, is this the whole world, man? You see what I'm getting at now,
Yes.
So you're developing the common emotional language. Now, the safety part, the last assumption, all right? How do you make it safe for the child to talk to you? This one's kind of subtle, you know? How do you make it safe? Well, I'm going to first go through the things you shouldn't do because they're so common, what parents do, all right? Remember, the goal is to help the children get it from in here to out here where they can now look at it, where it's not so intense anymore and they have words for it. That's the ticket. Well, how do you do that? All right. How do you make it safe? What you don't do is try to redirect the child. A lot of people, they'll make a joke or say, just think about this and you won't think about it. That's not emptying out. That's the parents just not wanting to talk about it. They're trying to, quote unquote, make their child feel better. They'll sometimes deny it. Oh, you shouldn't feel that way. That's not necessary. Or they'll go into what I said earlier. Well, I went through it too, and this is what I'm, but again, now they're talking about themselves and not, they're trying to give the child the benefit of their experience, but it doesn't work. For instance, like I said, if you had something that was difficult for you and you went to somebody to talk about it, if they cut in on you and said, oh, I know just how you feel, and I went through it, and just do this and you'll feel a little better. Well, I'm asking you, Daniel, you think that would help you? Would that help you at all?
No.
No, it wouldn't help you.
No. Yeah.
If it was a good friend, you might say, please hear me out. Right?
Yes.
If it wasn't a good friend, you might say thank you and go find a good friend. You know what I mean? Well, we do this with our kids all the time. The difference is the child will sit there and go, okay, mommy, okay, daddy, and you think they're okay now, but they're not. They're just agreeing with you because you're big and they're little. You know what I mean? I don't think you're going to get a 5-year-old to say, Mom, just shut up and listen. I mean, they're not going to do that.
For sure.
So you think you've got it nailed because you've talked about it, but the next time something similar happens, they're just as upset as they were before. I thought we talked about this. No, you didn't. You thought you did, but you didn't. Obviously, there's some things that also shut a child down. The parent gets defensive or angry. Oh, how can you say that to me? This type of thing. That's nonsense. Blah, 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 blah. Well, obviously, that doesn't make it safe for anybody, but especially a little child. You got to understand it. The child, what they need from you is to be okay. All right? Children turn to their parents to see how to react to things. And if the parents like this, guess what? That's not safe. And the other thing that happens, which is even more dangerous, children take in how to react to stress from their parents. If their parents react by going, oh my goodness, this is terrible, guess what the child's going to do later in life? Same thing.
The same thing, sure.
So you see, this is not simple stuff, but if you follow those assumptions, you're beginning to get on the right page. The role of a parent is to be the soothing presence. How you soothe may differ from, and how you help them mature. So in order to be able to speak to you safely, with language rather than behavior, this is all through the experiences with their parents. All right, over years. Okay, it doesn't just happen like this. Over years.
Yes.
You got to be aware of that.
Yes. So, Dr. David, to wrap up our discussion for today, what will be your short-term and long-term goals as clinical psychologists?
Well, my long-term goal it's not so long-term now. It was long-term. My patients would come in and take notes on what I'm talking about. I give handouts on it, and they come to me and say, gee, Dr. Marcus, I wish I had you in my ear Thursday night because I don't think I was doing it right, that type of thing. They said, please write it down. Please put it in some so we have something we can refer to. And So in the book, I actually go through different scenarios of parents and children at different stages of development. Parent says, child says, parent says, child says. I go through the whole thing about the emptying out process, et cetera, et cetera. And I annotated saying, this is what you achieve by saying this. And this is what this child's, response actually means and how to follow it. So it's sort of like a guideline type of things to basically fine tune their ability to really listen and respond to their children and develop this link with them. It's really important, especially when they get to their teenage years, because teenagers have an exquisite sense of privacy and they may not want you to know what they're really doing, but you really need to know the important stuff. And they have to feel safe enough to do that.
Totally
So,
agree.
okay, and so that's not, it was 3 years to research and write the book. And now I have an agent who's trying to, promote the book. I need a platform, which is why we're talking today, in order, the publishers to say, okay, he's out there, I need to be out there. So thank you for your help with that, Daniel.
Awesome.
And yeah,
Dr.
anything else I can do
David.
for you?
Yes, Dr. David Marcus. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world and looking forward for more and more empowering books to come. So can you please invite our listeners to support your projects to come or your being, your profession itself?
Well, they can go to my website, parentrx.org, and they can get a lot of information from there, from my previous podcast, from this one, and the book will be forthcoming, like I said. So that's what they can do at this point. They can write me. I can consult with them at dsmarcus phd, dsmarcus phd at parentrx.org. Maybe you can put that in your notes, so people can refer to that.
I will do, Dr. David. Yes, people, let's support Dr. David Marcus, because if you support him, more and more and more empowering books to come. So, Dr. David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Modicon people, see you soon. So, Dr. David, once you publish